Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Conversations Around the Fire on Spirit Reflections. My name is Fred Govea. If this is your first time here, Spirit Reflections is an ongoing series of bilingual conversations in English and Portuguese about people's personal and spiritual journeys, the tools that they found along the way, and how these tools have shaped who they are and the work that they do today. We would like to invite you to join our community on spiritreflections.org. Sign up to our newsletter so you can get the first access to our events and workshops. And we are also on Spotify, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We also get suggestions on topics and guests from you. So if you'd like to suggest a future topic or a guest, go to the Contact Us link on spiritreflections.org and we can start a conversation there. And tonight, we have our guest, Dr. Emma Bragdon. She's been a guest here on the show before, and I'm going to read her bio. And she's the executive director of a nonprofit online learning platform called Integrative Mental Health University, IMHU.org. They offer over 40 presentations on effective ways to improve mental health. And IMHU emphasizes the positive potential of spirituality and healthy lifestyle habits. Emma has been profoundly impacted by her 20 plus years of study of Spiritism in Brazil. And she takes healthcare providers to Brazil for 7-day seminars once a year so they can learn about Spiritist Therapies at Spiritist centers and psychiatric hospitals from her Brazilian associates in Goiania. And actually, we have a whole episode on the channel of the Spiritist psychiatric hospitals and Emma's experiences in them on our channel on Spirit Reflections. So go to our channel on YouTube and look for that. I'm going to also put a link of that episode at the description below. So without further ado, let's say hi to Emma. Good evening, Emma, and welcome.
Good evening, Fred. So wonderful to be with you again. Always enjoy being with you.
Likewise. Today's topic is very intriguing. I'm very interested to talk about it. Psychedelics in medicine and science today, the approaches, the therapies, how it's being viewed. But I guess before we jump on that, why don't you give our listeners a little bit about you, your journey, and how you got to where you are today?
Well, should I mention my journey with psychedelics? Would that be an important way to get into this, because that's the topic of the evening?
We could, yeah.
Okay. So I would like to just tell the audience that even though I was coming of age in the 60s, when a lot of people were doing exploration with psychedelics, I wasn't really drawn to it, because when I was 18 years old, I had been introduced to meditation and I thought, okay, this is it. This is going to be the cornerstone of my life.
Right.
And so I'm fortune-headed that I was actually in California during the Haight-Ashbury dramas that were going on. So I was aware of what was happening, but I wasn't really participating. In fact, right around that time, I landed in because I wanted to, in a Zen Buddhist monastery, and was doing a lot of meditation for the 4 years until my teacher died. That was Suzuki Roshi. So psychedelics was not my thing, but I was kind of curious, and I decided that I was going to marry a Zen Buddhist monk. That was totally okay in that day and age. And he said, you might want to try LSD once. So I tried it once and I thought, good experience, great experience. I don't really need to do it again. Thank you very much. So I'm not totally innocent around this in my early 20s. Marijuana was not my thing. Didn't get into that in a big way. But then in the 1980s, when I was in graduate school, I started noticing that some people in the graduate school student community looked particularly what I would call lit up. In other words, they seemed intelligent, more compassionate, that they had some source of wisdom that they were connected to. And they also looked quite happy, not like happy out of their mind, but just very content and at peace. So I got to know one of them, and she said, "Oh, well, we can't do this publicly, really, but MDMA was legal up until 1985. And there is a psychologist who is extremely well trained, who is guiding us into the use of MDMA as a healing device." So this was not a party thing by any means. This was being used along with energy psychology to assist people to really move through whatever kind of trauma they might have in their life that was holding them back from feeling satisfied and happy in their life and fulfilled. But it could also take care of just energetic congestion, which in Spiritism might be called a miasm. So it would help people to clear their auric field, as well as some physical difficulties they may be having, as well as emotional difficulties. And so I was in awe, actually, of what I saw. And I took training from this man, again, when it was legal.
And yeah, I was just going to ask you, why did it become illegal? And then Kirsten just made a comment here saying that they're bringing it back and making it legal again. But do you know the story behind why it became illegal?
Well, it was in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, really, that we were all subject, if we looked at advertisements, meaning billboards or TV, with ads that said things like, "This is your brain on drugs," and it would show an egg dropping into a frying pan, and then just kind of a mess. You just you get high, maybe but it hurts your brain, and then that was the idea. So there was, even though there had been quite a bit of research on using psychedelics for healing, even in the 50s and 40s. So it was known about, and even Johns Hopkins University was a very well-known university, was doing research on some psychedelics to be used for healing. And of course, if we look into the 12-step programs and Bill Wilson, who really started AA, there's a pretty clear story that he tried LSD at a certain point, and it really assisted him to drop out of his addiction to alcohol. So, that also is part of the history of this. But the US government at a particular time thought, this is not okay. We can't have people like Timothy Leary wandering around saying, drop out of college, or let's put LSD in the water in Los Angeles and just turn everybody on so they can also drop out. And it was getting through some people's eyes very, very dangerous.
Got it.
And also some people that I've spoken with recently made a connection to the Vietnam War and said there were some people who went over to fight in the war and started using either marijuana or other drugs, and started thinking, wait a minute, what am I doing here? I don't want to be fighting these people.
Got it.
And that was not really what the US government wanted to see happening. So anyway, there was a big push to annihilate really anything that was positive about any drugs at all. So I can see, I'm not reading everything that Kirsten's posting, but yes, there is at this point really we could say a renaissance going on.
Beautiful.
Where there is a considerable amount of research and some very and a considerable amount of publishing also that's going on that demonstrates that some of the psychedelics, when used in the correct set and setting,
Right.
That means with a person who really has the intention for healing, and they find a guide who is trained as a guide to be there for them while they go through the experience with a particular intent. For instance, the intent might be, I've had depression for 20 years. I want to get through it. I've been in therapy. It doesn't seem to be touching it. Psych meds don't seem to be touching it, but I've heard this might be helpful.
Right.
So that would be an intention. Or someone who was in a war situation who had post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD,
Right.
and they were having horrible nightmares or finding it difficult to trust anyone or having flashbacks. And it's not just for men who have PTSD. There are women who have PTSD as a result of maybe being mistreated as a youngster or having gone through some kind of sexual abuse, possibly rape. And in the same vein, they might be having flashbacks or nightmares or inability to trust people. And thus, their whole relationship life was really askew. They couldn't have a satisfying relationship. So, Kristen may have already posted this and I didn't read it, but yes, MDMA is known now when it's used in the right set and setting, so not as a party drug, not
Right.
dancing, but used in the correct set and setting with the intention for healing, can move people through the impact that trauma has had on them and actually relieve them of that trauma and the anxiety or depression or whatever moods have come as a result, including opening their, moving them into a space where they can really open their hearts to other people and with discernment and
Right.
thus be in a space to much more likely have a very satisfying relationship life. So people come out of these MDMA experiences, and MDMA is illegal right now to use, except there have been some research that's been funded. And so people have subscribed and been able to have MDMA in the right set and setting. And the results have been extraordinary. So people will come out of it saying, wow, I just had 3 years of psychotherapy in just a few hours.
Wow.
So MDMA has gotten a lot of good press, and ketamine, which I think also Kirsten was mentioning.
Should bring Kristen here to join us in the conversation.
Right. Well, maybe she'll be on next.
Yeah.
But so I have personal experience with ketamine because a medical doctor called me a year ago and said, I'm looking for a psychotherapist that has a transpersonal orientation to work with, leading and guiding people with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So I've been doing that for the last year with him. We don't work in a hospital or clinic. We don't do ketamine through infusion therapy, and there are a lot of clinics that are opening up right now that give ketamine as an IV treatment. So a person will come in, they might be relaxing in something similar to a dentist chair, like a lounge chair. And there'll be a nurse present who checks their vitals periodically, but there's no psychotherapist present.
It's just like you go to a spa to do a treatment, that kind of thing.
Similar, very similar. So a person is then given the ketamine through IV, and then they're alone with their thoughts and what they're perceiving, the insights they may be getting, which can be useful to a certain extent, but there's no therapist there to basically guide them and also perhaps remind them of what their intention is. And also, if something comes up that they want to talk about and process or get to the bottom of, there's no one there to assist them with that.
Right.
So as you can see, I'm pretty opinionated and feel that that's not the best way to roll with it. And the doctor that I work with, Dr. Benjamin Asher, gives the ketamine by injection, intramuscular injection. So a person will move into the experience in a very quickly, but it's not dramatic as in like a hammer hitting you over the head. It's actually
Right.
very, very gentle.
Got it.
And ketamine, the experience with one injection will last in its intensity for about 45 minutes. It's not a long process. Sometimes people ask for a booster shot, and so it lasts longer. But what I've seen is people, as soon as they enter into it, which might last, 2 minutes before they're entering into the intensity of it, just saying, "Oh, I'm something like I'm home. I feel like I'm home," meaning I'm connected to God in a very deep way. And so oftentimes people don't feel like talking because they have moved into such a profound state. There aren't a lot of words for it.
That's beautiful. And I think it's very complementary to the journey of meditating and praying and self-discovery and self-knowledge through studying spiritual practices, which are all amazing and very worthwhile. But at the same time, this scientific approach can be a great aid. For
Yes.
example, people who suffer from hyperactivity and attention deficit disorder have a very hard time meditating,
Uh-huh.
and it's I think it serves like a good aid, a little bit of a help to get you to a place where you can then discern and have deeper thoughts about whatever it is you're going through, right?
Yeah, I would call it deeper experiences because yes, there can be insight, but uh, what what the ketamine does, and also some other psychedelics do this as well, is they basically turn down the amygdala, that part of the brain that goes into anxiety or fear.
Mm-hmm.
So then we can experience life around us, life within us, real, every part of life without fear. And with a two guides with you, male and female, it's suggested that you always have a male and female there. There's a sense of safety, so, and protection. So that's it. It's not like someone should be afraid, but it's also, I just want to make a side note here that might be
Mm-hmm.
quite important. It's very important to choose guides that are ethical, because
Right.
abuses do happen in this field of psychedelics, meaning someone might say, well, I need someone to sit with me, and would you sit with me and just be there for me? And that's all well and good, but if a person who is taking the psychedelics can move into an extremely vulnerable state
Right.
and very suggestive state, and if the person next to them does not have ethical guidelines and sees someone who's in a vulnerable state, they may want
Take
to
advantage.
take advantage of that. And so sexual abuses have happened
Got
when
it.
guides don't have ethical guidelines. But so I
And
just wanted
no,
to
it's
make
an
sure.
important reminder. And actually, you do have two offerings on your IMHU website that are related to this conversation. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So I interviewed Dr. Asher, who is the medical doctor that I work with, so that people could, for free, watch the interview to kind of, see who we are, but more importantly, who is this good for, the ketamine assisted psychotherapy? And
Right.
are there people that maybe would not be well matched for this particular kind of therapy because of some kind of physical issue that they have, or perhaps some kind of emotional issue? For instance, if they've had a psychotic break, how long ago was it? Are they on medication? Have they been hospitalized? That kind of history is important to review. And Dr. Asher and I review the medical history and psychiatric history of each person before we say we feel like this is a good match for you.
Right.
So we do that in a very professional way. So anyway, to get back to the interviews, Yes, I gave you the URL so people
Mhm.
can watch those particular interviews. They're quite short, but very informative. And we go into exactly what happens during the structure that we offer. For instance, the medical review, and then we have a preparation session where we really ask people what their intention is and prepare them so that they know what will go on during the session, and then the session itself, and then integration afterwards, like a week after we do an integration session. So all of those elements are extremely important
Got it.
for the structure. Anyway,
So
there's a
this
bit
is not
more.
meant to be then an ongoing weekly like therapeutic process that you do for years, like you do with your psychoanalyst, for example, right?
Good question. So no, there are some people, who come in and they think, gee, I might need, I'm a hard case. I might need several of these. And one woman we talked to yesterday in her Monday and Tuesday, sorry, in her integration session said, I thought I'd like to do it again after my session, but I feel so good that I don't feel like I need one. But, I know I can call you back if at some other point I would like to do it, but I don't need one. And this is a woman who literally said to us in her preparation session that she was in a very dark place. She felt like she wasn't really very excited about living longer. She wasn't going to commit suicide. She
Right.
was against that, but she just felt pretty down in the dumps.
Wow.
And in her integration session, she was saying, I feel great. I love what I'm doing. I'm so glad to be alive. And I don't feel like I need another session.
And so just to be clear, this was a week after your initial session with the ketamine, right?
It was actually a little bit longer because I took a week vacation right after.
So then you can't even argue that the ketamine is still working through her system. That's making her feel good. That's why she's saying all these things. It
No.
wore off a long time ago, right?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes. So, and it works in different ways with different people. All the sessions that I've done with Dr. Asher, each one has been unique, and we couldn't predict exactly what would happen. And one of the reasons I love working with Dr. Asher is he doesn't really have an agenda, as in what we want to do is get this person to a certain place,
Got it.
anything like that. It's more create a safe place. We're completely present during the whole time. We're not working on our, computers or looking at our cell phones or things like that during the session. We are there, completely present for the person. And he makes the statement, that the most important thing is for the person themselves to get in touch with their own inner higher power or higher intelligence or spirit, soul knowing, spirit knowing, inner knowing. There's so many names for it. And to trust that. So once the intention is set, then to trust that inner guidance that comes from the inner knowing, and to accept what emerges with curiosity, leaning into it, not saying, oh no, wait a minute. That's not exactly what I was asking for. Let's go in a different direction. But trusting that the inner self is going to give us exactly what we need.
Got it.
So that's why we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And it's been very different each time. And people, each one have had a tremendous release of something that was difficult for them, but they couldn't also premeditate what was going to happen.
How does this work with Dr. Asher with the ketamine assisted psychotherapy connect with your work in spiritual emergencies and helping people going through spiritual emergencies?
Do you think your audience knows what a spiritual emergency is?
Yeah, maybe we should start from the beginning.
Well, I'll try to be very succinct. So Stanislav Grof and his wife Christina Grof started the Spiritual Emergency Network back in 1980. And what they were wanting to do was provide support for people who were having very strong spiritual experiences and were feeling disoriented and upset by them. So that clearly there are people who have spiritual experiences who are not upset by it and not disoriented, but they wanted to attend to those people who were disoriented and needed some kind of a conceptual framework and needed a particular kind of support that that had nothing to do with medication. It had to do with actually having access to people who understood where they were and could give them more orientation and assist them to get to the other side. And of course, deep spiritual experiences bring us into more peace.
Right.
And some would call it bliss. So, so the spiritual emergence process, which I think spiritists might call a lifelong process, that's certainly what I subscribe to, is about a spiritual awakening that happens over our lives that will include certain spiritual experiences, depending on the person. It can be very, very different from person to person.
Got
It
it.
may include a spiritual crisis where someone is overcome by the intensity and disoriented for a period of time, and may even need to withdraw for a while and say, wait a minute, I need some time out.
Right.
Just to reevaluate some things in my life. And if we think about people who've had a near-death experience, that very frequently happens when someone has been clinically dead and comes back and has had a near-death experience. Sometimes they've had very profound spiritual experiences, even meeting God. Some will talk about meeting God.
Right.
And that brings them, when they're back into their body and back out of the intensity of experience, it brings them into reevaluating. Am I doing the work I want to do? Am I in the relationship I want to have? Do I want to change the way I work, change the way I relate, et cetera, et cetera? So anyway, I've been working in the field of spiritual emergency, meaning of helping people in spiritual emergency, since the early 1980s. So that dates me, but but I also will lay claim to the fact that I'm considered a pioneer in this field, and definitely have done everything I can to assist healthcare providers as well as the public to understand that if you have a spiritual emergency, it does not mean you're mentally ill.
Right. And then you have to be committed to an institution.
Right. And because the whole concept of a spiritual emergency is not integrated into the way we understand mental health and mental illness, then the people who are trained as healthcare providers often don't know how to recognize and discern the difference between mental illness and a spiritual emergency.
Yeah. I mean, you're describing exactly what I went through myself in my early 20s when I was going to a psychotherapist for 3 or 4 sessions in a row. And he looked at my parents after the 4th session and said he needs to be admitted to an institution because he's showing early signs of schizophrenia. And my father said, no, I disagree with this. I'm going to fly my kid to Brazil and try a different approach. And it was there that I discovered Spiritism and understood from a different lens that what I was going through was kind of an emergence of mediumship and spiritual emergence. And I was able to then come to terms with it. And here I am today.
And one reason I take people, healthcare providers, to Brazil is to understand exactly how the Spiritists do work with people in spiritual emergency, which I think is completely brilliant and way ahead of what we have here in the United States. And I would include Europe and Australia and all English-speaking countries, and maybe all other countries, although I haven't been to all other countries, so I can't make that claim. But anyway, I'm extremely impressed with how the Spiritists can recognize and discern when a person is in a spiritual emergency and what kind of help they need. And many, like yourself, Fred, were really mediums in the rough that needed maybe some training as well as just confidence building.
Yep. That's it. And
And
I
language.
wonder, and what?
And language. In other
Yeah,
words, some kind of words to describe to themselves what was going on,
right.
because we're usually limited to words like schizophrenia and psychosis.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we were so conditioned to traditional academic science, mainstream science, that we run away from every other terminology or lexicon. But I'm wondering, in cases like mine, for example, where you're having a type of mediumship that starts to blossom, um, is this type of ketamine assisted psychotherapy something that might help the person get in touch more with that extrasensory side? I mean, I'm wondering if you've had those experiences with patients or clients.
Um, you know, I haven't. No one comes to mind who has been in that particular zone. Although I think it might be extremely helpful for people who maybe have some discomfort
Hmm.
around their sensitivities or their intuition, and want to understand it a little bit better, or just feel more at ease with it or more at peace with it. It could be extremely useful with that intent. But we haven't had anyone come in with that particular intent. It's been mostly, how do I get through this anxiety? How do I get through this depression? How do I release this fear? How do I make peace with the trauma that I had as a kid? Those are the
Right.
things that generally show up, which are, the reasons that people generally go to a psychotherapist.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was working at a Spiritist center as a volunteer in New York for many years, people would find our center because they would search on Google terms like "I'm hearing voices," "I'm seeing spirits," "I'm seeing a ghost." Where can I go to get help? Then they would end up there. We would talk about the Spiritist approach. But I wonder if you go to a setting like the one you're working with and you say, "I'm hearing voices, I'm seeing things," if the ketamine helps them go through that experience while they're in the session, and there's some kind of a dialogue or intervention or a conversation that might help them go through it. I don't know, just I guess I'm speculating.
Yeah. So Fred, because I'm trained as a mental health care provider, as soon as we talk about things like hearing voices, I go both ways. I go to the direction of, well, if someone is hearing voices, the voice might be telling them, kill yourself, you're a bad person.
Right.
And in that case, we would hopefully review and learn that someone was hearing voices that were destructive, and suggest they not do ketamine at this
Right.
particular time.
Oh, I see. Got it.
So that's extremely important. But if someone is hearing voices, as in, touch this person on their shoulder and it will help them heal because of the bike accident they just had, or giving them a sense of intuition about, a way that they can be helpful to other people. Hearing those kinds of voices that are
Right.
basically of positive intent, but in this imagination, we're imagining that this person may feel like, wait a minute, why am I hearing this voice? What's this about? Does it mean I'm crazy that I'm even hearing any kind of a voice, even
Hmm.
though it seems to be positive? That the ketamine might be really interesting way of exploring and coming to peace with, oh, okay, this is my guidance or my mentor speaking to me, and I'm developing a closer relationship with my mentor.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Mark asks a question that I had and I was about to ask, so he read my mind. So, could mediumship training benefit from psychedelics?
Whoa, what a question. Well, thank you for asking the question, Mark. This takes me into a whole new zone I hadn't been thinking about. But let's first say that I am not talking about psychedelics generally. In other words, people wandering off on Saturday afternoon when they've got some time and going to the park and taking psychedelics by themselves. I'm talking about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy that's in the correct set and setting, meaning someone has an intention for, maybe in this case, to answer your question, maybe someone has the intention of developing their mediumship. And then they select guides that are ethical and also have some training in mediumship. In other words, they're not apt to say, well, mediums just belong in Brazil and those are crazy people.
Right.
But instead, people more like me that feel a high degree of respect for the well-trained mediums in Brazil. But if we change your question a little bit, can mediumship training benefit from psychedelic assisted psychotherapy in the correct set and setting? I would say absolutely yes, because I think for some people who are training as mediums, they do enter into some kinds of spiritual experiences that can be a little bit scary because they're new. And
Right.
and they're also wondering, wait, is this part of my mediumship or is this imagination, or am I picking up on what's going on with my neighbor? How accurate am I? There can be, there's a lot to learn in becoming trained as a medium. And so it's possible that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy could help people gain more confidence in really connecting with their spiritual guidance. And I know from having spent a good deal of time in Brazil and having access to really talking with people who are supervising and training mediums, that it can take a while because people have to really sort out, am I seeing accurately, or is this some kind of fragment from my past, or something that's come through my family that really doesn't belong in my mediumship, but maybe belongs in my psyche because of something that I'm still holding on to about my childhood, or about what happened last night at the dinner table, or whatever.
Yeah.
So really becoming discerning as a medium is extremely important. So we don't bring our personal stuff
Right.
into what we do as a medium. And ideally, as a medium, we are clear seeing and being very clear about what we are hearing from our spiritual guidance.
Right. Yeah, and that's the dilemma in mediumship circles and spiritist centers and contexts between the unconscious mechanical medium versus the conscious medium. And from personal experience, I am the latter, and it's a constant battle trying to decipher, is this coming from me? Is this my imagination, or is this the spirit? And that's why they call it medium anemic communications, where your animism, your own soul, is obviously interfering and doing an imprint, your own fragrance, your own tastes, your own signature in a way in the communication. I mean, it's almost inevitable if you're going to be a conscious medium where your interference is not going to happen. It's going to happen, right? But as long as it doesn't distort the essence of the message, then, at least in my experiences in the spiritist center settings, then it's fine. But the unconscious mechanical mediums have an advantage in this regard because they just don't remember a thing. It just goes right through them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Mark elaborates here, in particular, to accelerate and refine your healing, like the healing practices, I guess, around the mediumship ability, right, Mark?
So really interesting concept. And I'd certainly step up to the plate if someone wanted to research that. I think that would be fascinating. And my guess is that there could be a lot of assistance in that regard. But ideally, mediums don't have to lean on any kind of substance.
Right.
And they're being trained to move into that state with maybe some lovely music and a prayer and fellowship with others and strong intent. And I admire that tremendously with the well-trained spiritist mediums.
Right. And actually, Vanessa says exactly that. She went the opposite way because she was so sensitive. She had to stop taking any drugs because she couldn't handle it. So her mediumship was already too, what's the word? Off the charts, I guess, that her sensitivity was already too high. So anything that would add to it would be overwhelming, right?
I hadn't thought about it before, but now that we're discussing this, my guess is that people who are having these experiences with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, they attune themselves more to their inner guidance. And in a sense, and it may be primitive if we compare it to a well-trained medium, but in a primitive or first step kind of way, maybe second or third step kind of way, in attuning to their inner guidance and their inner knowing, they are in fact moving in the direction of mediumship.
Right.
And so, maybe it is happening, but without people saying that that's their primary intention.
Right.
Whereas Mark is asking, well, what if it's your primary intention? then what? Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard it said in certain contexts that the mediumship of the future is going to be called intuition.
Mm.
In the sense that you won't necessarily have to go into a trance state and have this very intense manifestations through voice channeling or automatic writing. You'll basically be attuned to whatever frequency a spirit is in and basically report, but without necessarily going into a visibly altered state, because
Yes.
it'll be more refined by then,
Yeah. And people feeling more at home with it.
Yeah, exactly.
At this point, we call it altered, right? An
Good point.
altered state.
That's a good point. I wonder if you can tell us how you envision, Emma, this ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and other type of psychedelic treatments progressing in the next few years. If you could sort of envision in a way that we could sort of marvel at. I mean, I'm interested in having a session myself.
Oh, well, as Kirsten was saying, MDMA assisted psychotherapy will likely become legal next year. But that doesn't mean it's for everybody. Like you can just go down to the drugstore and pick up some MDMA and then use it on the weekend with your partner.
Right.
It means that certain healthcare providers will be licensed to use it in the correct set and setting. So it will be legal to use in psychotherapy for those people who are trained.
Got it.
But it's becoming obvious that in some places, and the state of Oregon is one place, that they're actually training people who have like a high school education, not just psychologists and the healthcare providers, but people who are, it's not like they're not intelligent, but they just don't have the academic training, but they have a desire to create a safe space for people. They get the training on how to be a guide, and they can then move into being like a peer counselor for someone. So, things are changing in a very interesting direction. So, in some parts of the United States right now, they have removed some of the really strict legal consequences of holding some psychedelics. So you can actually have on your person a certain amount of psychedelics.
Got it.
And it's legal. If you actually have more than a certain amount, and it's obvious that you're buying and selling and you've got a business going around it, that's not legal.
Got it.
So, but things are changing in the direction of more tolerance, and also it's so clear through the research and the publishing of research that there's tremendous positive potential in the correct use of psychedelics, meaning psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So, this is a major transformation from the war on drugs. Major
Yeah.
transformation. We're doing almost 180-degree change. But
Definitely.
it's very important to keep saying it's not about opening up psychedelics. So on Saturday afternoon, you hang out on your couch and you just, take whatever you feel like taking because it's all in a bowl in front of you. It's more like science is saying, yes, it's obvious right now that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, if done in the correct set and setting, can be hugely beneficial for people. So we need to open up to that. But then there has to be, it has to be done in a very thoughtful way. So for instance, there's no regulatory board right now. So let's say someone gets is educated, maybe they're a psychiatrist even, and they start being a guide for the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, but then they start being abusive for some reason. People are people, they change. There's no regulatory board, except in the case of a psychiatrist, likely the board of behavioral examiners, whoever it is who oversees their license as a doctor, would definitely have something to say. But if it's someone who does not have such a regulatory board, then we move into a difficult zone.
Right.
And so who's going to determine the ethics of this, and who's going to be the regulatory board or group? And how it unfolds is extremely important. But I think actually that there's a tidal wave of interest in this. And it's so obviously clear that we're in a zone where there's far more mental illness than there has been ever before. We're in a really difficult place. We don't have enough psychotherapists to manage all of the people who are needing and calling on psychotherapists and psychiatrists. So we're inadequate in terms of the numbers of people. But the other thing is, Fred, which I follow, I don't know if you've been following, but very recently in the last few weeks, there have been some articles and publications coming out saying, the idea that people who are depressed need something that will give them more serotonin. So it's the idea that it's a lack of chemistry that needs to be
readjusted or something.
Adjusted, is basically falling to pieces. And so that's a very big change. We've relied on that for, since the 70s, 80s, 90s. And at this point, it's at least one out of every 5, oftentimes 1 out of every 4 people who are taking psychiatric medications with that notion that they need to balance the chemistry of their brain. So if that idea goes out the window, then what is going to come in to replace it?
Creates a huge space for us to maybe have a resurgence of a more natural approach, because at the end of the day, if you look at the tribes, ancient tribes, they had the shaman who was the medicine man, who would facilitate people's journeys and processes because of their knowledge of the plants and the medicines and the herbs. What if we can make this knowledge access more easily available for people, readily available for people, so that they can engage in those experiences, I guess, not only individually with a shaman or a psychotherapist, but perhaps in a group setting with fellowship, in order to share insights and experiences together and be able to be more of service like that. It's amazing. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, if we take the model from the Native American church, or if we go to Africa in our minds and look at what some of the tribes do there, there's a notion that if someone in the community is mentally unbalanced, it's actually an expression of the community.
Wow.
It's not the individual that has a problem. it's the whole community. And so the community needs to come together and really look at what is out of balance.
That's like systemic in a way, right?
That's exactly right. It's a systemic issue. So if you look at things from that point of view, there isn't the stigma of being mentally ill. It's actually like the people who have imbalances become like the town crier who's saying, oops, there's something going wrong with our community. We need to come together and figure out what it is and rebalance ourselves as a community. So anyway, to get back to your question, one thing we haven't talked about is microdosing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're taking a very small amount of a psychedelic, and various psychedelics are being used, but taking a very small amount, which does not give you that psychedelic experience, like seeing funny images and distortions, but microdosing in the correct way, and that would be under supervision of someone who's really knowledgeable and ethical, can turn a person from feeling horrible to a person feeling good. Their mood becomes more elevated, not like becoming manic or
euphoric, and
no, but just feeling like, oh, it's a good day. It's not like it's a bad day over and over again. It's a good day. And creativity reemerges. So I'm one of the people that I work with as a client in private therapy is someone who's highly creative, and she entered into a very difficult year with divorce and then having to redo her where her income comes from, and just it was extremely stressful. And she got to a very low point, and she was wondering whether she should be taking psychiatric medication. And it came to her as a gift, actually, that her acupuncturist was able to give her some pills for microdosing. And she said within hours that the darkness lifted, and she has been for weeks now feeling good, creativity recharged, and just
and very little to no side effects.
No side effects at all. Yeah. So anyway, I think it's important to bring that into our conversation.
Definitely.
I don't in my partnership with Dr. Asher, we don't deal with microdosing at all. That's something that other people are very good at, but we certainly know about it, and are happy that exists. And when you ask, Fred, so what about the future? What's the future going to look like? I'm hoping that there are going to be a lot more places that offer ketamine-assisted psychotherapy the way Dr. Asher and I do it, which is the intramuscular, not the IV, and that there will be more people will have more access to knowledgeable folks who can really assist them with microdosing. And it will be much more common knowledge how to use psychedelics in the most positive way, and how to, stay away from it when it's not right.
Right.
So, I had the opportunity to go to a conference in the end of June. And one of the people who's a mover and shaker in the field of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is Rick Doblin. And he started a organization called MAPS, which is spelled exactly the way it says, maps.org. And he was commenting about marijuana. And he was saying, which is not really a psychedelic, but people can take a lot of very strong marijuana these days and enter into some very extreme states.
Psychotic, even, right?
Correct. So he was commenting about teenagers taking it and saying, there are some people who just say teenagers should stay away from it completely because their brains are still in the process of pruning, and they don't really have an adult brain yet until they're about 25.
Right.
So it's not a great idea to get teenagers into the habit or into any kind of access even of marijuana. And what Rick Doblin told me, and thank you for putting that website up, is, marijuana, if used in a very judiciously by a teenager, might be helpful because it might open them up to their creativity. It might open them up to relationships with themselves and also with others in a way that they didn't have access to before. But that doesn't mean it should become a daily habit.
Right.
Of lots
And in a microdosed kind of approach also, right?
Well, microdosing is oftentimes, done like once a day or quite a bit one day, then you stop for 2 days, then you take some more on the fourth day. So I wouldn't say, making a habit of it is what Rick was talking about, but he was basically saying to completely turn people off of it and say it's just bad, bad, bad until you're 25, and then maybe just have a little, is going too far. So I'm aware that there are real negatives to the people using a lot of marijuana.
Yeah, for sure.
And also psychedelics and plant medicines.
Yep.
And actually, the most important part of all of it is having a positive intention and doing integration.
Definitely.
So,
I mean, if we are already marching in a direction where we are starting to get away from the notion that I have a chemical imbalance in my brain and I need to drug myself for 30 years with psych meds in order to change my chemical imbalance, and rather we're going to the direction where it's less about me on an individualistic level, but perhaps it's systemic, and therefore we need to connect with one another in order to examine these effects and maybe work on the causes together. That already is such a paradigm shift that I think it's so powerful and positive that I'm really hopeful we go into that direction.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I would love to interview Rick if we can make that happen somehow. We can talk about it after the show, because I think his website is amazing, and I'd love to see what he has to say about it too.
He's an exceptional human being, and knew at a young age that he was going to be helping with bringing this into the limelight in terms of it being legalized.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I'll find a way to get in touch with him. We'll figure that out. In the meantime, everybody, look in the description of the video at Emma's Integrative Mental Health University website, IMHU.org. She's got 2 courses there on psychedelics and also ketamine-assisted psychotherapy that you can learn more about. This was just a brief exposition on the topic, but I hope you enjoyed it. Emma, thank you so much for being here around the fire on Spirit Reflections. It's always lovely to see you again.
Thank you. I always enjoy talking to you, Fred. You know that.
Beautiful. And everybody, stay tuned for our next episode. And until then, thank you very much and have a good night.
Good night.